from Stephanie today. Keep it less than 60 seconds per person, okay? Start with you.
Hi, my name is Davin. This is my first time here. So what I wanted, I haven't really done a lot of travel, especially internationally, mainly in the U.S., but I'm really just curious to hear the stories of what you have to share about. So all the different ways that you've been able to travel around the world.
How she made it happen.
Yeah.
Good. Ray?
Yeah, my name's Ray. My favorite destination was the Galapagos Islands, for sure. Yeah, I think I heard that you can't go ashore now, but I'm not sure of that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
To some.
Could be a internet rumor, who knows, right?
To some of the islands that's true, but not all the
Or
islands.
some of the islands.
Okay. And what do you want to learn from Stephanie today?
Everything.
Everything? Okay. Right, next.
Troy, I'm just here because it's a sunny day and I had nothing to do. See what I can learn.
Gotcha. All right, next.
Brenda, so far my favorite place is probably Valencia. Just started traveling, I'm retired now, so want to find out how to do it budget-wise and where to go and what to do. So.
Gotcha. Perfect.
Hi, Carrie. I'm in the Impulsive Tourist group.
Oh, good.
I've been to South America, Latin America, Europe, North America.
Of course.
And I just want to hear any tips on doing more travel, if there's any tips for that.
Got it. Next.
I'm Neil. Mostly I'm a cruiser. Been on 20 cruises, about to go on my 21st.
Wow.
And but I have hitchhiked around Europe.
Oh, wow.
And, been to a few other places. I have been to Galapagos, 2014, and once again, Carrie, always interested in new tips and little things like that. I can remember as a young buck of being 20 and hitchhiking around Europe, where you really got your information from was going to the American Express office, because at that time you had to have traveler's checks, and that's the only place you could travel, cash them in. So you'd be talking with all these other people while you're waiting and things like that. Well, what about this place? What about that place? Well, I'm heading off to Valencia or something like that. And that's how you got that was the Travelers Intelligence Agency, as I call it.
That sounds fun. Next.
My name's Nick. Like Neil, I'm also a cruiser as well.
We haven't gone cruising together.
Not yet. Not yet.
Oh, I was totally wondering that one.
That's 22 for you.
Yeah, he is so good looking.
Oh, I'm shocked.
Yeah, most of my cruises is basically to and from Vancouver because I'm more of a budget traveler. Been to the Far East a few times, but haven't done that for a while. So 101 countries for today's topic really intrigues me. So that's the story.
Next.
I'm Lori. When I was 32, I had been to 32 countries at that time. So I just hit number 33 a month ago.
Oh my God, that's a big gap.
Long time. I had children in between, and as you know, when you have children, you don't do much, or you just go to repeat countries like I did with my daughter. So I'm just looking to get some budget ideas and how she plans some different types of travel.
Next.
I'm Tom, and I think I've probably been to about 60 countries, but I don't count.
Oh, not at all.
No.
Nothing. And just want to hear about your experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Next.
Crystal here. I don't have much travel experience, working too much and too hard in the past. Try to work less and travel more, and today I wanted to see how Stephanie managed to travel to over 100 places.
Awesome. Next.
Elaine, and same reason, just wanted to see how you're traveling and how you did it.
Perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Kendrick, and welcome to the Travel and Live Free Meetup. We've been running this meetup now since 2015, so it's been quite a while, almost 5 years. Recently, we were featured in the Richmond News. I don't know if you've seen the newspaper, but they made a huge mistake in the newspaper. They said that when I took a year off to travel, I spent $187,000
Wow.
instead of $18,700. So they added a zero at the end. But you can check it out. They fixed the online version, but obviously the print version cannot be fixed. So the people who only read the print thinks I'm rich. Now, with that being said, I have traveled to 88 countries around the world. Not as much like Steph. I would like to know how she's doing this. And I'm here to learn more about Stephanie's experience, just like everyone here is. So without further delay, everyone please welcome Stephanie.
I'm going to start with some wise words from this man,
Okay.
the one Dave Chappelle. Let's see, is the volume as high as it can go?
I think the TV, you have to do it from the TV.
From the TV.
Yeah, on the side.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. Perfect.
Is it too loud now?
I think
Well, we'll
maybe.
find out.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
Who's this?
Just press play.
Who's Dave Chappelle?
He's a comedian.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, he's really good.
Yes. He's better than me, but I'm all you get today.
That she raised me and raised me well. We had a real oral tradition in our house. I knew the word griot when I was a little boy. A griot was a person in Africa who was charged with keeping the stories of the village. Everyone would tell a griot the stories and they would remember them all so that they could tell future generations. When they got old, they'd tell them to someone else. And they say in Africa, when a griot dies, it's like a library was burnt down. And my mother used to tell me, before I ever thought about doing comedy, she said, you should be a griot.
I'll one-up Dave Chappelle, this legendary comedian and griot,
Come closer.
and say, I'm gonna both be a griot, and I'm also gonna live a life worth telling to a griot. So what's worth telling a griot? That's a highly subjective thing. My opinionated answer originates a decade ago, long before Dave Chappelle ever made this speech, and long before I myself ever became an adventurer. A decade ago, I needed a playful distraction while rehabilitating from a traumatic back injury that had me bedridden for 1 year. Yeah. So what better distraction than sex? I wasn't having any. If anybody actually took the time to read my meetup page, which I actually write the same bio every single time, I'm still a virgin, and we'll explore that a little more later. Sex has always been an intriguing topic to me. It's a fun and philosophical topic. Janet Jameson, who some people champion as the world's most famous porn star, created another art form that I voraciously devoured, which is a memoir titled How to Make Love Like a Porn Star, a cautionary tale. For someone who's just a porn star, she had a lot to teach about life. So too did her co-author Neil Strauss of the New York Times and Rolling Stone. He advised men how to get laid in his book, Rules of the Game. Now, I'm not a man trying to get laid, and I'm not even interested in having sex with anyone. But Neil helped me answer that question I had, which is, what's worth telling a griot? Neil has written a whole book called Rules of the Game, which is a follow-up to the game. And despite being a very long book, I would say I can summarize his tips to getting laid into 2 simple ones. You basically wear the most eye-catching clothes, and you tell the most ear-catching stories. He calls it peacocking. And indeed, anybody who knows what a peacock is, it's a male peafowl that has the most gorgeous feathers with iridescent patterns that fan out, that functions as a courtship display. Me being an electrical engineer by undergrad education, I have many, many, many male friends. At the point when my rehab turned into an absolute nightmare, I really needed a distraction. The nightmare was that my acupuncturist had potentially exposed me to bloodborne diseases, such as hepatitis and HIV, because he was using dirty needles. Now, anybody who knows the cost of a pack of needles, it's less than $1, less than a handful of cents per customer or patient. The fact that he thought exposing me to these diseases was worth him saving a couple pennies here or there was the worst part. I would have preferred him to at least have saved a couple $100. When I gathered with my friends, I needed a distraction. So I introduced them to the book I was reading at the time, which was Rules of the Game. Being engineers, but also being men, they debated with me the techniques to picking up a woman. I was more interested in debating those stories, though. Steph, they chided and scolded. Did you even read the book? Neil was very clear. These are fake stories that you make up to get women's attention. Just like you wear these gregarious clothing, that's not stuff you would normally wear. Again, to get attention. Nobody really choppers around Victoria Falls, the sound of the whirling blades so deafening that they distract from the spectacular shimmering water curtain unfurling before your eyes. What do you think, you're some big-time celebrity?
much did it cost for a helicopter ride?
I will get into that right now. So this peak experience that my friends claimed a decade ago that only celebrities should have is going to introduce to you my world famous 3 fucks or 3 F word travel tips. I introduced them in 2018, but I only covered aspects, and I'm going to go in different directions this time. So the first F word travel tip is to fact find. The second one is to follow through. And the third is to fix. In 2018, when I introduced my 3 F word travel tips, fact finding, I made it sound like it was something that you do before you travel. And my preference for myself, and probably for most people, would be to do as much fact-finding and research as you can before you travel. In reality, for the best experiences, like my helicopter ride across Victoria Falls, you're going to be actually fact-finding while you travel. A couple of people have been mentioning Africa, and some of you who've been to the meetups before will know that I survived the spectacles, the snorts, and the stenches of wild beasts roaming in Africa while bush camping over 13 countries and 4 months. The adventure safari company that I joined managed the more difficult logistics, which were the safaris, 33 of them in total, transportation, campsites, and food. We customers managed day-to-day chores. We organized our own activities outside of the safaris. We cleaned the safari and transportation vehicle. We built our own tents, and we cooked our group meals. Yeah. For the activities outside of the safaris, the safari company had their own preferred providers, their preferred helicopter company, so they said. And they probably earned commissions from them, as you can expect from most of these situations. Here's where even on a tour or cruise, you might still want to fact find. Instead of just going with whoever they suggested, like maybe most people do because everyone else is doing it, I decided to continue to fact find. I decided that I was going to know the town and know what type of local infrastructure that they had, and maybe negotiate my own deal with a local operator. As soon as I stepped out of Victoria Falls town and my campsite, I was welcomed by an entire street full of tour storefronts. Many people came up to me with suggestions and ideas. As I walked down the street, I realized that actually there's only one helicopter operator and everyone sells his services. By going direct to him, I was able to negotiate a cheaper, longer, better helicopter flight than what everyone else did, while also being able to ride shotgun with the helicopter pilot. The question is, how much did I pay for this helicopter ride? I'm going to ask you, how much do you think that type of experience is worth?
Well, they probably charge 400 or 500 Canadian.
Okay, if they were to do that, I probably would have not gone on it because that would have way exceeded my budget.
Well, the reason I make that comment is I was in Kenya many years ago, and a balloon ride was $400 or $500, and that stopped me from going on it.
So going back to this safari company I went on, just so everybody knows how much I spent, I think that people would not be able to guess how much I went on 4 months, 13 countries, bush camping. Any ideas? Price per person per day, how much I was spending.
Per day or
per person per day. That's the easiest because when you're going for a long time using a unit for easy comparison, how much do you think I spent?
$120.
Well, I know, I'm not gonna say.
Yeah.
$50.
There we go.
Huh?
There we go.
$50?
$50.
Okay, here's the catch, okay? In order to be spending that amount of money, or that little money, you have to be able to camp during monsoon season, which is considered low season. Now, as someone who did that, I will say, I think it was well worth the money I saved because I encountered many different safari companies, and generally speaking, there's a mindset that there's low end, high end. High end is what Troy was mentioning, some of the prices where you would actually stay in accommodations. But in Africa, that's actually the biggest cost. If you want to stay in 4 walls and a ceiling, your price shoots up exponentially. If you're willing to every day build a tent, take down a tent, cook food, actually do chores, have a daily life there, then you save a lot of money. Some people might say this is my one luxury vacation, and they'll spend what I spent in 4 months in a week in luxury accommodation in Kruger National Park in South Africa. I actually went to Kruger too. So I went to every single major game park that everyone can name. Masai Mara in Kenya, Ngorongoro, Serengeti in Tanzania, Kruger, every single major one that you can name, I was there. And the only way I was able to save money was I was in a tent, and I went during off-season monsoon, okay? So yes, the first night that I built my tent, without knowing that the rain was so deep, I actually opened up my tent to go to the washroom and stepped right in a giant mud puddle, wetting myself, dirtying myself up. But to me, I'm an adventurous person. I know I don't have sex, and we'll get into that, but everything else is fair game. I think that that 2018 trip is one of the peak experiences of my life, and I had 4 months to spare because for me, I'd rather have the longer time than the shorter time, and I was willing to do whatever it took to have that experience. I also really wanted to bush camp amongst the animals. So in Serengeti, we were warned that you have to go to the bathroom in buddy pairs, because otherwise an animal might sneak up on a solo person and give them a scare. We had animals come up to us while we were cooking meals. We had very curious, what do they call them, Pumbas, the warthogs, sniffing around. We had Cape buffalo sniffing around. But generally speaking, because these adventure safari companies have been around so often, they are specialized, they know the terrain, they know the animals and the landscapes. As long as you listen to their advice, you'll be okay. My tour guide had someone die on one of his tours, but the person absolutely ignored every single warning. For example, they were in a campsite where they were separated from the particular animals with an electric fence. The electric fence had a sign that said, "Danger, do not cross." But obviously, because they have workers who need to go back and forth, they had built a little bit of a ramp to allow those people to go. A lady decided that she wanted to go over, so she did. And right in front of her face was a hippo. Now, she went towards the hippo to pet it. And the hippo showed her how he felt about her. And she's no longer with us. But that's what I mean by if you listen to what your local guides, who are the experts, they will tell you exactly what you need to know. I know that there's a discussion between going for what's easy and going for more research when you're on the ground. As a cruiser myself, I've cruised with my mom and brother, and they've been to 61 countries with me. I've normally organized my own shore excursions. For example, here in Belize, I organized my own snorkel package, even though I was on a tour. My continual fact-finding has actually earned me unique experiences that nobody else has had, even people on the same tour or cruise. I was the only person on my tour who swam with the rare and elusive manatee. I was the only person on my tour who slid down the side of a volcano in Nicaragua. I was the only person on my tour who observed the rare elusive leopard in South Africa. The reason why is because I feel like as much as we have the internet nowadays and people give a lot of advice, on the ground, things change, and it's worth your effort to talk to people. Now, fact-finding might sound like something that takes a lot of time and effort, and indeed, it does. Okay. But I turn it into a fun learning experience. When I was in Belize, walking up and down Quai Colquer, again down another street full of tour operators, I asked interesting questions about manatees, sharks, turtles, and rays, all of which animals that you could see on snorkel excursions. I asked questions about their habitats and their habits. The most knowledgeable operator was also the only operator that, as part of their snorkel package, allowed free rental of their professional dive equipment. As someone who has an underwater action cam, I'll say that the footage that I was able to record using their dive equipment is worlds better than I would have had on my own. It's also the best souvenir. Keep in mind that this is actually low-vis water, so low-visibility water. The fact that I was able to capture anything on camera and have any memories at all is because I use their professional dive equipment. Tourism in developing countries earns big, big bucks. That also means there's increased competition. And I found that knowing that, the more you can talk to people and know what they're offering, the more likely it is that you'll either have a better experience or a cheaper experience. Because I've been traveling so much, normally speaking, even when groups of people have split off to do their own thing, I've trusted my own method because I know that having this experience requires, I would say, the legwork. To me, if you can turn it into a fun situation, take it as interacting with locals who are knowledgeable, then I personally don't think of it as work. I turn it as another adventure that will help me have the best experience possible. Each person is probably going to have to make their own decisions about it. For example, my mom, who has the benefit of coming with someone like me, or Karen, who goes with Kendrick, they have somebody there who does all the legwork for them, and then they just leverage into these mind-blowing, memorable experiences. If you don't have a Kendrick or me around you, you might have to become the Kendrick or me. The second F-word travel tip was follow through. And follow through, I think, is actually the most difficult of all. Why should we even travel? Why follow through on traveling at all? Back to our friend Neil, who was teaching us how to pick up women. Something about what he said has always bothered me. and I've alluded to it. The thing that bothers me is, why do the stories have to be fake? I've always been the kind of person, if I were already making the effort to engage my imaginative and creative faculties to create these stories, I'd be far too excited, not for the sex, but for the story itself. You've already opened up a world of possibilities in your mind. Why would you stop there? These stories and the excitement that they brought was something that I stumbled towards during my darkest days. When I was waiting for the results of that HIV test, it was fucking excruciating. Okay. I cursed every person. Fuck my mom. She parented negligently when I was a child, meaning that I had a weak back that would be susceptible to back injury years later. Fuck my dad. He stole money from our family business and ran off, leaving me physically and financially disabled. Fuck that acupuncturist. Instead of helping me rehab my back, his cheap ass was trying to kill me with fucking dirty needles. And most importantly, fuck me. Because up to that point, all I had done was listen to stupid society's expectations. Go get some good grades. Go get a good job. Okay, I had done all that. In between all of that anger, hatred, and disgust, there were these sparks of stories. What would it be like if I actually lived the life I wanted? What would it be like if I actually started traveling? Being face to face with death is actually one of the best things that can happen, because if you recover, you're grateful to have a second chance to truly live. I'd need that motivation, because even after I received that negative HIV test, I'd still need to invest another 3 years to fully rehab my back, rehab my brain, and everything else that I would need to rehab to actually become an adventure traveler. So what about the other 20% motivation? 80% sounds like a lot, but when you have to sustain for 3 years, you need that extra 20%. Neil, our friend giving us advice about picking up women, is actually starting to give a lot more advice that I'm using. He discovered an inconvenient truth about people. These men who were trying to pick up women were actually using picking up women as an excuse to make self-improvements that they were too insecure to make on their own. Creating these captivating stories just as a mental exercise or just for creativity's sake, that's lame and pretentious. But creating stories, these same captivating stories, for the purpose of picking up a woman, you're James Bond now. You're an alpha awesome male.
Or my ex-husband.
Or your ex-husband. He might have read the book. Yeah. I use this to my advantage because I've realized that being self-driven with my gratitude was only going to take me so far. I had to come up with what I call excuses to travel. My excuses are my mother and brother. My mother and brother have actually been to all 7 continents with me. Their country count's lower at 61, but still quite respectable for a woman who's 65 and a brother who's barely in his 20s and 30s. I found that my excuse to travel was that I wanted to share my love of adventure with the 2 people that I love most. Our recent trip in 2019 was a cruise and land tour through Eastern Europe and the Arabian Peninsula, ending in Dubai. We touched a number of highlights that I had been looking forward to for the whole of my traveling, including Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. Egypt and Jordan were my 100th and 101st country, respectively. And that experience, again, was fraught with a lot of fact-finding. The cruise that I went on had only added this itinerary back after at least 5 years away from that area of the world. They did it with good cause because some shit went down when we were in port in Israel. And as you all know, as soon as I left, the Middle East is in the state it's in now. I'm happy I've been able to share that experience with my mom and brother because I'm not sure whether that's actually a place of the world that I would go back with them again. When I travel with them, I have something that comes out in me that I don't actually display often. Many of you will know, obviously, as a virgin, I'm probably not a mother, and I'm not, and I don't want to be. So many people around me do accuse me of being an entitled millennial. I'll take the millennial title if people allow me that one. I'm not the most caring person in the world, and I'm not the most responsible person in the world. I'm those things only when it comes to me. I don't stand here saying that it's the coolest thing in the world to be an irresponsible twat. But again, like Neil Strauss said in his book, I was using my mom and my brother as an excuse to make some self-improvements that I really didn't care too much to make if I was on my own. That's why a lot of times, even as solo backpackers, we might find difficulty continuing because we're very much in our myopic journey by ourselves. Even as someone as independent as me, who solo travels a lot by myself, will say that if you can find people that you care about to share the journey with you is a different experience than if you go by yourself. I wouldn't necessarily say it's better, but I would say that it's something that I want to have. From a practical standpoint too, as Troy will probably be able to tell people, you have extreme economies of scale the more you travel with people. Solo often can be the most expensive way to go if you want some level of comfort. If you're the type of person who wants the 4 walls and a ceiling, and you don't want to stay in a hostel, you'll end up paying somewhat of a double occupancy room. Most services, unless you negotiate them, are still designed for double occupancy. So if you can find people that you enjoy traveling with, I'd say that that's a good way to go. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, no worries. Let's see here. Back to our F-word travel tips. The third one is fix. Now, I think as travelers, especially when we just start, we have this conception that traveling is going to be a perfect oasis that's separate from the boredom, mediocrity, whatever you want to call your normal life. I'd say that that is the mentality that can kill a trip. Traveling to me is a part of life, and there's no way to insulate a part of your life from the messiness and complexity of life itself. In fact, if you're doing the more adventurous type of traveling, like traveling to developing countries, shit's probably gonna go down. Again, as a former electrical engineer, we're taught a lot to plan, have redundant systems, research in advance, and try to prevent problems as much as possible. Of course, this is what you would want to focus on. But the reality is, a lot of the times, if you're spending, like Kendrick, a year away, or like me, months up to half a year away, shit's gonna go down, and you have to have a fixing mentality. One of our favorite stories is, before that bush camping in Africa, I decided to route via Europe for 6 weeks. That was a way for me to save money, and that's a way that people can think of saving money, is routing through different hub spots and taking a little bit of a detour. Africa, usually you're gonna have to fly through Europe anyways, Middle East, through Europe. So if you take a look at how things are routed, you can find that you can add some additional flavor to your trip without any extra money. For example, for the price of flying round trip from Vancouver to Africa, that would probably be, depending on your circumstances, 1,300 to 500 plus. For less than 1,000, I flew through Europe, into Africa, back to Europe, and then to North America. Now, of course, the budget travel tips are things where, in some ways, you have to work and hustle for the amounts of savings that you get. Kendrick is the person to talk to if you want to learn how to points hack to have free flights. Before I landed in Europe, I knew of an opportunity to go gorilla trekking in Uganda. Now, as much as I said that the safari that I joined was cheap, and it was, one thing that they excluded for sure from this package was gorilla trekking. Because gorilla trekking, if anyone has looked into it, depending on how you do it, is anywhere from a couple hundred to over $1,000 for 1 hour with the gorillas. That is the most expensive single excursion that I've ever come across. And I've been to Antarctica chilling with the penguins. Even that was cheaper. For the same price of gorilla trekking, I had me, my brother, and my mom have a whole day with the penguins in Port Stanley, Falkland Islands. We interacted with king, rockhopper, gentoo penguins. But that was something that I had talked a lot about when I was a kid. That was something I dreamed about, interacting with the penguins in Antarctica. I had never dreamed of gorilla trekking. So when I saw that price tag, I said, fuck that, it's out of my budget. I'm already traveling for 6 months. I gotta save money somewhere, so X that out. As soon as I landed in Europe, I had a change of heart. I thought to myself, this opportunity to gorilla trek may never come again. I've already decided to do that entire southeastern tip of Africa, which, if I bring up a map, might help us visualize. There we go. This one's better. Over the 4 months that I was bush camping, I went through the entire southeast block here. So Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, Lesotho, Eswatini, and Mozambique. I was already here, and I designed it this way because I didn't know if I was going to be back here in Africa. So if I have this opportunity to guerrilla trek, I better fucking take it. The only problem is I didn't budget for it. I landed in Europe thinking, how am I going to scourge together this $1,000 to guerrilla trek? I came up with a brilliant idea. I knew that as a person, I needed to eat food, so I kept my food budget. I knew that as an adventurer, I had already booked my transportation to what we call the small hidden gems of Europe. They are Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, Monaco, San Marino, and Andorra, tons of tiny landlocked countries in Western Europe. I hadn't booked my accommodations yet, so I wondered if I could save money doing that. I've couch surfed before, which is a website where strangers open up the extra space in their houses to people free of charge. I was able to secure couch surfing hosts in some countries, the bigger ones, the ones that I were using as basically switch hubs like France and Italy. But as you can imagine, some of these tiny landlocked countries that you might have never even heard of, more difficult to find a couch surfing host. So I decided, in between couch surfing hosts, I was going to sleep wherever I could. That means some days I slept on exposed park benches. One day I stood up in a telephone booth and somehow fell asleep standing up. In a museum, I just casually stayed after hours and slept in their women's bathroom. The next day, when the security guard came in and found me, she actually made up an entire story of how I could have possibly been in there. She said, "Oh, you must have just come in through the door that I opened, right?" "Sure, yeah." "You look hungry. Would you like a banana? Would you like some tea?" Everywhere I went, I had small acts of kindness get me through. I slept in a castle that was really royal. Now, obviously, it was an exposed castle on stones. I learned a lot about myself on that trip. My mom didn't know that I was doing it until I accidentally let the cat out of the bag while doing a live vlog. "Did you just fucking say that you've been sleeping on park benches?" I was like, "Oh, that's the Neil Strauss thing. Remember how you make up stories to attract people? Yeah, that's what I'm doing." I have no clue what's going on in your mind, Stephanie, but I'm too far away to be able to do anything about it. Now, I tell this as a funny story, but that fixing mentality, to me, was worth it because I knew that there was a short time frame and something that I really wanted. Where things sort of fell off the wagon, if you will, as if that wasn't bad enough, is, as you can tell, I'm very open about my virgin status. And I'm also a mess of contradictions like many other people are. I haven't had what you would call traditional sex. But if anybody has heard of the story 50 Shades of Grey, I find the kink world adventurous. I just have what I would call the no 3 holes rule, if you catch my drift. As long as the meat sausage stays out of my 3 holes, I'm fine. Now, when I'm couch surfing, I actually do protect myself because I let my mom know where I am. And when I have conversations with people who are opening up their homes to me, I actually am very clear. I say, despite the fact that my YouTube channel is called The Horley Virgin, W-H-O-R-E-L-Y, Virgin, that doesn't mean that I'm having sex with you to be able to stay on your couch. I'm very clear when people message me saying, here's my home. I say, thank you for offering me your home. Just so you're aware, I'm not here to exchange sex for a couch. Now, some people disappear after that, and that's great. The reason why I'm so open and honest with my intentions is because I find that people can only give you what you need if you tell them what you need. And that goes both ways. If you're telling people what's not on the table, then if that's what they're looking for, they're not going to offer to host you. Now, obviously, that's worked for me to great success 99% of the time. But the 1% of the time that I can really get myself into trouble happens in developed countries. Ireland was where I had my most hair-raising experience. I had had that conversation with a potential host saying that I do not exchange sex for couches. He said, okay, that's fine, then I'm not going to host you. I said, that's cool. When I arrived in Dublin Airport, a man was waiting for me at the airport. I thought, oh, okay, I guess one of my hosts ended up coming through for me. He drove me home. He introduced me to his housemates. He actually has a beautiful Victorian house that he rents out to a number of people. I met him. It was a house full of men, but I wasn't really concerned. Because the way I think about it is, I don't assume that people have the worst intentions. I just assume that they are who they are, and if I'm very clear with who I am, that we can establish the necessary boundaries. He said that my accommodation was going to be a bunk bed next to his bed. That didn't cause me any concern because that's happened with a number of my hosts. Sometimes they just live in small accommodations and you're going to have to be in close quarters with people. The first night he tried to kiss me, I pushed him away and said, I'm not really down with that. The second night, he suggested to me a kink situation that I found interesting. So I warned him very clearly, no 3 holes, this is non-negotiable. If we're going to do this, you have to be very clear about that. And he said, okay, cool, gotcha. As we were doing our kink adventure, he started to get pushier. And he was trying to negotiate that 3-hole rule. I said no, and I said no repeatedly. And that's all that happened. He asked, some would say aggressively, but I was very clear that the answer was no. I tell this story because I find that there's a tendency for travelers to think that travel is an either-or. Either all of the nasty stories you've heard about people are wrong, there are no Hitlers out there, or they're all true and they're out there to kill you. I find that, as we all should probably know as adults, people are very complex. The answer isn't just, go travel because everyone will welcome you, or don't travel because everyone will kill you. The answer is somewhere in the middle. The reason why I bring up the fact that this happened in Ireland is people have the expectation that this kind of stuff would happen in other countries. But my experience has been the 2 travel situations that I would consider the worst ones that I've had have happened in developed countries, Switzerland and Ireland. Does that mean that if you go to Switzerland or Ireland, that it's a no-go and shit's gonna go down? No, it doesn't mean that. Does it mean that if you go to Tanzania, you're gonna be safe? Because I was? doesn't mean that either. Travel involves an inherent amount of risk, and when we come back from break, I'm going to talk about the recent 2020 environment and how we might think of navigating that.
All right, everyone, we're going to take a washroom break. So the washroom's right here, and we'll start again in 5 to 10 minutes, all right?
Thanks.
Thanks, Steph.
Yes.
There's only one washroom, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah. It's okay, everyone knows. Everyone's a regular.
There's not men and women?
No.
Yeah.
Establish your boundaries and we're good.
Yeah, there's a
See
bush
you
over there,
all?
Neil.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
There's a bush over there.
So Kendra, I got the CPA.
I have to get the CPA, but I've done it earlier.
Oh, CPA. Yeah, okay, nice.
Yeah, I know exactly.
Yeah, but don't
So you
use it
mentioned
to
you're
study.
formally an engineer. Are you working then, or you're
No, what I'm doing is we have a family business still. So my dad stole, but we're still running it. We're still around. We have an accounting firm, and I work with my family part-time, and then I go traveling the rest of the time. So I 6 months on, 6 months off. Yes, yeah. I never actually did engineering work other than research. I spent a number of years in the corporate world, and that back injury that I talked about happened a couple of years into my career and completely switched things around. Like I said, when you're face to face with death like that, it just completely changes your perspective. I was actually going to mention Kobe Bryant, but I never did. I was actually going to mention Kobe Bryant, but I never did, because the chopper story would have led into it. But one thing that I noticed about people who were crying on TV about Kobe is that they realized that his death caused them to think about mortality in a different way. One of the sportscasters actually said, Kobe in all his greatness, he could die. What does that mean for me? And I think it's actually really helpful if people can use these situations that are tragic but have already happened to learn. So, for example, I say that the best thing that can happen to you is to be face to face with death and recover. Some people don't have that luxury. So the best would be my mom and brother who were observing me. If they can learn the lesson without having to go through the pain, that's the best way. But oftentimes, you have to be closer to it in order to learn the lesson. I'm not sure what my mom and brother would have done without me going through the experience I did, but knowing their mentalities, I think they aren't the type of people to go organize a trip for themselves. They really do benefit from the fact that I'm doing it. So I knew that using them as additional motivation, that I was doing it for other people as well. And that's why I suggest if you can find anything to help you stack your goals and alignment, anything can help. A book, a person, a concept, wanting to have sex, whatever it is that can help you on your way. Because I think once you open that door in your mind that traveling is worthwhile, I hope you'll probably continue to do it again. But one of the things that I do want to stress to people is that it's not necessarily terrible or dangerous. It's like life, it's in between. So a lot of people have a tendency of saying, the world is great, go forth and travel, you'll be fine, you'll be safe. That can be an irresponsible message to tell people. The opposite message can also be irresponsible, saying that you will definitely die or you'll be raped. So I try to strike a balanced approach. I still think that for me, traveling is the most important thing that I've ever done, and it's my number one priority. More broadly, I would say it's having adventure. So ink is one of them. But I got myself into trouble a couple of times, and I had to just stay strong and say no. Looking back at it, more people have told me that that was a very troubling circumstance. While I was in it, and even to now, I felt like I was in control in a sense that I explained what I was about. that guy, the host, while you can say a person who was very pushy, he wasn't on drugs, he wasn't drinking, he was an otherwise normal person in my interactions with him. My read on him in interacting with him was that he was just trying to push, but he wouldn't rape. And that's not an easy assessment to make. So, going forward, I would not do the same things that I've done before with regards to the kink on women. That's something that I'm definitely axing out of my repertoire. I just did it because I felt compelled to do it at the time, but I've closed that door for me. I tell that story just so people know that people are very complex, and you can't just say an easy assumption either way. So, best to be more measured about the way you approach things.
Do you think that at that moment you think, I wanted to challenge this?
That's a very difficult thing, and that's why I say people are complex. Kendrick and I get this a lot from other people, which they say, we seem to sort of really like to push the edge. For example, this guy's heading to Syria later this year. He was in Congo when they were having an active Ebola outbreak, right? He looks at me and says, I'm crazy. I look at him and I say he's crazy. And we all look at each other and say, you're crazy this way, that way, that way. Everyone has their own risk assessment. I would say sometimes you do really get a little too close to the fire. But for me, if you were to ask me, I'm 80 to 90% certain that that man posed no actual danger to me. And that's only something I would know by interacting with him. Now, obviously, there's still 10 or 20% that I could have made the wrong judgment call. So that's why every time I travel, I come back and I talk openly with people, including my mom and my brother, because I want that feedback. Sometimes the worst thing you can do is think that you know best. So part of me talking openly with everyone is really hearing what concerns might be had and actively changing as I go. So my mom knows that entire story, my brother knows that entire story, and my brother said, I think that you really put yourself in a poor position, not because necessarily he would have done anything to you. Your highlight of the trip was Africa. You had 4 months of bush camping, which was going to be a very intense thing. The fact that you went that 6 weeks before in Europe, which was supposed to be your rest time, doing this crazy shit, even from a mental standpoint, you were just burning up your energy from your goal. And that's the part that I agree with him fully. So he said, as much as you're an adventurous person, you have to also pick your adventures. It can't just be all the way there, all the way here. So that's why I tell people I actually have to avoid things like sex and drugs, because I can't be full tilt on everything. You gotta pick your poisons, right? If you're doing coffee and vaping and drugs and heroin and cocaine and all that, eventually it does all add up. So you do have to pick your poison, so to speak. But it's not an easy answer. And that's why I like to present the complexities of the situation. In presenting to people, I have to organize the situations that I've been in my head and put it through a critical eye. So I learn a lot about myself and my own travels by explaining my travels to others. For example, just in speaking to you two, looking back at me with the concerned faces, I start to think to myself, okay, the balance of people that I've told this story to, 95+% of the people tell me that that was a concerning situation, including people who are in the Vancouver kink community. So the Vancouver kink community is actually world known. It's underground, but the people who are in it, they stress safety and consensual fun. So we're obviously operating in a very gray area. The kink world, if sex wasn't gray enough, kink is an absolutely different situation where people can get themselves into very compromising positions. And when someone in that community told me he thought that it was concerning, I had to take a step back. Because he's done crazier shit than me, but in a controlled environment where he knew the people and where they have actual safety monitors. So they have these events in Vancouver where they have special people who are here to monitor the activities happening and make sure that everything is still safe. So that's why actually when you do these kinds of things in public, it's the safest because no one's going to kill you in front of 200 other people. But when you're alone with someone, like I was in the situation, looking back, I probably had to change some shit. So the change that I made was I'm just not going to do that kind of stuff anymore. It's good for a story, but I was a little too close to the sun and now I have to come back. Yeah. See when he...
Can I pay the $3 for one day by not?
I've actually done a little bit of traveling and stuff in Europe, but I did it on my own. And that's the song kind of still at that stage where I'm like, okay, this was in 2008.
Yeah.
So since then I haven't really done any other travel other than work conventions and stuff like that. But now I'm getting that bug again to start going and traveling. And I'm like, oh, but I've already done this solo traveling, so I don't want to do that anymore. I want to take people that are important to me. I want to go travel together with the people. So it's like,
do you have buy-in from them?
What's that?
Do you have buy-in from them? Are these people who mostly agree that it's worthwhile?
I don't know yet because this is just like, we're coming to this. It's like, okay, well, you know, like little by little, like a droplet of water in the bucket to make the travel vibe is starting.
That's the thing about my talks that are a little bit different from the people that he has presenting. I concentrate a lot on the mental and the difficulties because I feel like we can give you a ton of travel tips, but if you're not in the right mindset to travel, you'll never start. And sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's finances, a lot of times it's mostly fear, and even I go through that myself. But talking to people and hearing more about the things that can happen, I appreciate that. I also appreciate when he tells me all the shit that happens to him. And we have this consistent battle about what's right for you or me, because he's done stuff that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't go to Syria right now. I personally wouldn't go to Syria right now, but he's going with another meetup member and his wife. So everyone just has completely different ways of assessing things, and there's no right way. Now, obviously, if you end up dead or raped, that's the absolute wrong way, but in life, I was treated by this unethical acupuncturist. He was actually a very weird case because in China... Yeah, oh, yeah, sorry.
All right, everyone, we're going to start again. Go ahead, Steph.
Just for timing, when do you want to start Q&A?
Let's at
30?
30? Is that okay with you, or do you need more time?
I think, yeah, we can do it in 30.
Okay.
Yeah.
30,
Okay.
30, 35.
Okay.
Okay, good, go ahead.
Just so you know, I don't mean to interrupt, I have to slip out at 3:45.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. That sounds good. So, I think this is an actual difficult time to be traveling in. Ever since I started in 2013, things have always been happening in the world. Shit's always been happening. But for some reason, 2020 just seems like the perfect storm of every single possible thing that could be happening is happening at the same time. You've got impending war, you've got potential pandemic, you have all of these things that can happen, and the number one question I'm asked is, should I go on my particular trip, whatever they've planned, this type of itinerary, should I go here, should I go there, what would you do? This is a very difficult question to answer. If any of you have attended my previous meetups, I talk a lot about travel.gc.ca. The number one thing I tell people is just to stay updated with the Government of Canada's travel warnings and advice. That being said, even with the current coronavirus and situation in Iran, the government had some lag time between what was happening and them updating their travel warnings. That means, in some sense, you have to be thinking ahead to when you're traveling, what could possibly be happening at the time. Now, unless any of you are oracles, we don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now. We don't know what's going to happen a month from now. So the only thing that we can comfort ourselves in is that we've done the best research possible at the time, and then if shit happens on the road, you're just going to have to deal with it like you would deal with a problem that happens in Canada. One thing that you can do is download the government's app. So this is the travel.gc.ca website, but in app form. So Travel Smart app. And this is the app that you can download. I would say that after 101 countries, the government does a pretty damn good job with this website. Normally, I actually only use this website for my research purposes because that's tied to travel insurance. Depending on what the government says, the status of the countries is whether your travel insurance is even effective. You can think that you're buying travel insurance for a country, but if it's on the travel ban list, then your travel insurance is ineffective, and you have to know that. So, for example, if you were to ask me right now, what would I do if I had a trip coming up to Iran, I would say, read what it says. The good thing about the website and the app is that they make it very clear with bold lettering that Iran is now on the shit list. If you buy travel insurance and something happens to you in Iran, most likely it's going to be nullified. You got to remember that most people, when they buy travel insurance, depending on who their broker is or if they buy from online, they don't walk you through all the potential pitfalls. They send you a 50-page document that you're expected to read. I know people hate it when I say this, but read it, because then you'll know what you're covered for and not covered for. The problem was these updates didn't come immediately after the US killed Soleimani. These updates came a couple days later. There are many people who are up in arms saying that the Canadian government should have jumped into it immediately and upgraded it. The Canadian government should immediately extract all Canadians from Wuhan province back. The Canadian government should. Here's where, as someone who came up through the Canadian education system, was born in Canada, I have to say I trust the Canadian government more than I would trust other governments. Now, for some people, that doesn't mean much. If you're comparing to Mugabe in Zimbabwe, whatever. But the problem is we live in the real world, and the governments are about the best resource we can have. We pay our tax dollars towards them. They have specialists assessing all of the news items. They have information that we're not privy to. We have an entire Canadian CIA that's working on our behalf. We don't have access to that kind of information. So when people ask me, am I following the headlines about coronavirus and about Iran and Soleimani, I say mostly I'm just following the website, knowing that even this website could be delayed. I don't think that the delays are anything that the government can improve on any more than they already have. Because there are so many things that have to go on before they decide to do something. for example, if you were to ask me my personal opinion, countries that are extracting their citizens and repatriating them from Wuhan is more a political move than a health move. Most of the health experts have said that that's not necessarily the way to go. Some experts have even said whatever quarantine lockdown thing they are having going might not even be the best way to go in China. For example, there are now stories of people coming out and saying, okay, I'm not dying from coronavirus, but I'm dying from no food, no water. I'm dying from other diseases that they seem to not care about now because they're so focused on corona. Just like the story that I told you in Ireland, I wish I could give you an easy way to assess risk. It's just not that simple. I'm actually somebody whose degree was specialized in risk assessment. So as an electrical engineer, I specialized in critical systems analysis, and a lot of what I did for my capstone project was assessing risk. So in some ways you could say I'm even ahead of the curve. Unfortunately, the way the human brain is designed, it's not a computer system. Even our astronaut Colonel Commander Chris Hadfield, who's an astronaut, who's 10 times smarter than me, 100 times, infinite times smarter than me, has said, you just gotta try your best to focus on accurate information. In today's world, it's hard to know what's accurate information. But I would have to say, in my opinion, I've essentially eliminated all news coming out of the US, including their governmental organizations. I don't want to listen to it anymore because there's just too much going on there. I focus more on Canada, and if I need some extra information, I will go to Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. But mostly I do focus on the government of Canada. Now, one thing that I've never mentioned before that I think is important to mention is that the government of Canada has a free service where you can register for updates from the government. And I register Canadian abroad. I usually just type it like that. And they have a registry where you can be notified in case of an emergency abroad or a personal emergency. So let's say yes. You accept. And you would enter your information and your destination details.
Is that for people traveling, or is that people who are, say, go to Mali for teach English as a second language for 6 months?
You can do both. I think I've tried. The thing is that I country hop so much, so sometimes it's quite tedious to enter it in.
Yes.
But my trip was 7 months long and I never had a problem.
Okay.
Have you tried this website?
I don't use that. I do.
Okay.
I do.
And have you entered the longer itinerary?
I don't really. I do a country a month, so.
But you do a country a month? Okay.
The only thing I don't like about it is they don't do WhatsApp.
Ah.
So you need to have your phone number, which sucks.
Yes, and that's one of the things where hopefully the government's going to ramp up their services as we go. But like anything in government, we have what we have and we'll work with that. I think one thing as a traveler that I've never done, but I would consider doing more, and I would encourage people who travel a lot to do, is they actually respond a lot to the advice of Canadians who are traveling on the ground. So sometimes it's useful for you to let them know certain situations. For example, when you're on a cruise ship going to Russia, they have a 72-hour visa-free if you purchase an excursion from on board, or organize through licensed situations. I just ignore the second one and just say the first one because it's much easier if you just buy an excursion on board. Those are situations where for the price you pay, they include a free visa. You can think of it that way, so then I'll go with that. I'm not necessarily committed to any particular way of traveling. I don't always spend my time to fact find by myself. Sometimes I go with whatever's easy because it's easy. When I'm traveling with my mom and brother especially, sometimes time is a premium, especially on a cruise. In a cruise, you're in port, you have a limited amount of time. I would say, even in cruising, I've spent 150 days plus on cruises, so we have bronze medallions for cruising. We've been to all 7 continents on a cruise. We've done 98% of the ports on our own, organizing our own thing, but that means 2% of the ports I buy a shore excursion. So one of the things that I want people to know about traveling is that it is actually a very difficult thing to navigate.
Yes.
It's not as simple as saying people are all mean and they're going to kill you and rape you, or they're all so welcoming and generous. They're a mix of everything. Our world is a complicated place. The only thing you can do for yourself is to research and concentrate, focus on the accurate, evidence-based approach. And in today's world, even that can come into question sometimes, but you do the best that you can do. For me, I focus on these websites. I know that other people, depending on situations, do different kind of research. He's a good example. He's heading to Syria. What did you do? What did you do to convince yourself that it was okay to go to Syria?
Oh, I've done a lot of research. I went to Facebook groups, spoke to a lot of people who's been to Syria. I'm going to partner up with people in this meetup who's crazy like me, who's going to go to Syria. I spoke to many tour companies in Syria, and I spoke to, I think, 7 different companies, and I asked them the same question about safety, and they all told me it's okay. That's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've been watching a lot of YouTube too, and a lot of people are going to Syria now too, so it seems like it's common now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the room might be divided. Maybe show of hands. Would anybody be comfortable going with Kendrick to Syria? Okay. So there's 1 person, 2 people, 3 people.
Depends on the area.
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to.
Damascus.
Yeah, you're.
Yeah.
Can you just put us, like, what is that website where you can
Oh.
register? Sorry, I missed that. I'm trying to
So voyage to
Travel GC.
yeah, travel.gc.ca will have a link to this.
It's
Okay,
in there.
not the app. The app doesn't have a link to this.
The app might.
That's a good question. I've never
Yeah,
actually
the
used
app might.
so.
Yeah. If you've downloaded the app, you might be able to tell us right away.
Okay.
So,
It tells you the vaccinations to need too.
sorry?
It tells you vaccinations as well.
Yes, exactly. So I concentrate on evidence-based approaches. With that being said, since we're getting close to Q&A, I'm going to answer that question that I've been threading through the entire presentation, which is what's worth telling a griot? My answer is a griot's story would be any real-life experience that's so adventurous or crazy, and when you tell people, they think that you just made it up to impress a woman. Now we can head into Q&A and answering some of the questions that you might have with your specific travels or anything else in general. Yes.
I don't have a question at the moment, but I do have a comment.
Mhm.
You're talking about this particular document for the Canadian government. One of the things I found out a long time ago is that if you're a homeowner or condo owner or whatever, and you're going traveling for more than 24 hours,
Mhm.
You have to have a quote-unquote qualified person to look after your place. Otherwise, your home insurance is null and void. And one of the things that I have done is I give it, my next door neighbor looks after my place, and I give them a nice reward at the end, gift certificate to a nice restaurant. But because I'm going to be away, what I do is I give them a complete itinerary, which ship, cruise number, okay, where I'm boarding, and I get really detailed booking number, and it goes on for like 2 full pages, okay, and telephone number and name of my best friend in Vancouver, telephone number and name and full address, including email address of my brother in Calgary, right? And I also send this to my brother in Calgary, so that if they have to get a hold of me for whatever reason, they don't have any problem finding me, okay? And it has to be very detailed. It has to be a quote-unquote qualified person. The insurance company never told me what a qualified person was. but my next door neighbor is a qualified arborist.
Okay.
And he and his wife have done a lot of traveling and things like that, so I think that covers it. But the other part too that's similar to this is I make another page of all the embassies that I'm going in the countries I'm going to, and including all the consulates. For example, in 2010, I had that piece of paper, and in Paris, I was pickpocketed, lost everything, passport, money, everything. And because I had that piece of paper in my hotel room, I knew where the embassy was, and if I was traveling outside of Paris, in some little country village, I knew where the nearest consulate was, because the Canadian government in France, as the example, has consulates in Marseille and in Lyon, right? So I always have that information, and my travel partner has that information exactly, and I have it from that friend too, and it's just a simple way. It's called cover your ass.
Yep.
Okay, but it's a resource that you've got to take with you for safety as a backup.
Yep.
So I just want to make that comment.
Yep, that is a very good comment. Thank you for that. I think it depends on your home insurance, because I recently had to read that fucking document, and for us, there's a very technical description of what means your home is vacant, and it's basically, they never even mentioned a qualified person, they just mentioned a person. So I do something similar to you, but thank you for your procedure, because I think yours is much more robust and something that I'll consider incorporating in the future. Yes, like we've said before, tons of shit can go wrong when you're traveling, and the more you can fact find before you travel would be best, but also using that fixing mentality, knowing that things probably will go wrong, anticipating as much of those things as possible. I keep a cheat sheet, I call, which is something that I've condensed to one single piece of paper that has everything about my itinerary, about my travel insurance, photocopy of my passport, but all condensed into one single sheet of paper. So I don't carry around a whole portfolio of paper. I just carry around that one cheat sheet. And if I can't fit it on a cheat sheet, my mentality is it doesn't matter enough to print. I've done it well. Yeah, you also put it on a thumb drive and on your email and on a Google Drive, but that's in case your electronics have been swiped and you don't have easy access to electronics. Any other questions? We've got plenty of time. Yes, go ahead.
I haven't traveled on my own yet, but I want to. And you mentioned fact finding. Where do you start?
Okay. Don't do kink with someone in Ireland. That's the first one. Yes, because I've had a couple of questions about it, and this is something I should address. I told you guys that story to show you the complexity of what traveling is like. If you were to ask me now, would I do something like that again? The answer would be no. I had a very long heart-to-heart with both my mother and brother. So yes, my mom and brother know all these details about my life too. And my brother said, forget the fact that he could have raped you. Let's forget that. The fact that you did all of that before what you consider to be the highlight of your life, bush camping through Africa. Just from an energy management standpoint, you burnt up 2% of your battery doing this thing. What did you gain out of it? That's a good question. I'm adventurous, but I also have to pick my adventures. When we're talking about the fact finding, I seriously start with this website because they have a complete list of different things to look for. So for example, let's go back here and just take a look. They have a whole report. Security, safety, health, all the vaccines. If you start here and read the entire thing, and I mean read the entire thing, then it'll give you a good idea of what you're getting yourself into. So having read these reports for many, many years, sometimes I just read them prospectively. For example, the Egypt report. I've been wanting to go to Egypt since 2013, but that was when they were starting to have problems. They were actually already starting to have problems since about 2011. So I've just been consistently monitoring it, reading it, and then suddenly this year, they dropped the Giza pyramids off the shit list. Parts of Egypt are still on the shit list, but specifically the pyramids of Giza are not on the shit list, so then I brought my mother and brother to them with me. That's my rule. Is with myself, I'm a little more lax, but with them, we're pretty strict about keeping out of what we call here the red zones. Now that's why if you were to ask me, even just the recent trip we did through the Middle East on a cruise through the Arabian Peninsula where we hit Israel, Egypt, and Jordan, I would not do that again with them.
What's cruise line?
Norwegian.
Yeah.
I have a feeling they're actually going to probably cancel this itinerary now, given the circumstances in the Middle East. Even without the killing of Soleimani, many of the countries have had hotspots. So you're literally going in the safe one pocket and then jumping from safe pocket to safe pocket. But when you're in an area with largely majority red zones, it can wear on you. And when you're traveling with people where you're technically responsible for them, like I was for my mother and brother, it wears thin on you. So for some people who say, oh yeah, you always joke that you don't want the responsibility of having children, you certainly threw that in the face by taking your family traveling. And that's something I consistently think about too. With my family, 61 countries is a lot. Maybe it's about time to think about calling it quits or repeat to safer countries. This is something that I'm consistently thinking about myself. But back to your question, I start here, and then like Kendrick, I just search everything that strikes my fancy. Once I read this report, I then have an idea of where I want to go, and then I just search online of those things. Another website that I like to use a lot is Tour Radar. I do have a referral code for this if you're interested, and it's already on the Meetup website.
What's it called again?
It's Tour Radar. And I find this a very useful research website. So even if you never buy a tour from them through me, I don't care. Because, for example, when I was wanting to go to Africa, I said, okay, I want to go to Africa. Fine. Africa. When? I had a rough idea, let's say back in 2018, I actually pulled the Africa trip together in 2 months of planning. So I knew that I was wanting to go maybe in February, March, search. Okay. They have so many ways to sort. Being the cheap person I am, I like entering, back then it was per day, let's say you can set a budget of 50, whatever it is. I don't know nowadays if they have anything like this anymore. Maybe not. Well, they still have some.
Wow.
Okay.
Oh, there's two.
There's two.
Victoria Falls.
$3.
Wow.
Let's do 100 just to be more in line. Yeah. That's one thing too, is that sometimes they're going to have crazy sales because, for example, coronavirus. Plenty of people are canceling travel, not to China, but just to anywhere. I have a trip coming up. I only have the flight out into Turkey, and already my mom is saying, you should cancel it. I was like, it was a free flight. I'm not canceling it. Turkey is not affected. But some people do think it is, and they've just canceled all travel anywhere in the world. When people cancel, you can pick up a cheap cancellation. But then again, do you have the risk tolerance to be traveling at this time? Some people would say no. I would say travel to certain countries is definitely fine. I would probably stay out of China. But even then, I would stay out of China mostly because the government isn't allowing you to obtain travel insurance. If they did, I personally don't think coronavirus is yet the big hullabaloo that people think it is. Yet. It could go that way tomorrow. It might never go that way. If you were to ask me, based on my assessment of the situation, I believe there has been mass hysteria and overreaction. But that could switch in a dime tomorrow. I'm not sure. That's my own assessment.
Would you believe in getting a mask for traveling today? Would you advise?
I would say it depends on what you're trying to do. From what I understand, the way the masks are designed, they're not really to prevent you from getting the virus. They're to prevent you from
Spreading.
spreading it. Yeah. So for me, I actually have those N95 masks sitting around in my cupboard.
You
I
have
haven't.
any extra ones?
I only have enough for my family. And even then, I don't know that I want to use them now. I'm going to be flying out on March 2nd or 3rd. I have to double check. I have not planned a single thing. All I have is the flight to Turkey. I was actually being lazy because I had just come back from the previous trip. And then shit started happening around the world. My original itinerary was going to be going through Iran, and then the Soleimani stuff happened, and then the Iran plane was downed. So then I thought, okay, maybe I'll reroute through Eastern Europe, but I still held out hope that maybe things in Iran would calm down. We'll see. So I actually haven't done anything yet. I'm still waiting and seeing. Yes, it's only a month left, but I have enough travel experience that if I have to reroute through Eastern Europe, I'll do that. Also, I had been planning to fly out of China, and that's also been axed. So that's one of the things that, in some ways, not planning can help when there are these major issues that are happening. It gives you flexibility, but it can also be difficult. So it's one of the things that you have to balance.
To answer more of your questions, one of the things that I do when I go traveling is you'll have to make a decision where you would like to go. Let's say Turkey, and I go to the library, Vancouver Library, Richmond Library, or Langley Library, and see what kind of books tourist books they have on Turkey. You know, if I'm going to be in Istanbul for 2 days only, one of the books is called Top 10 Istanbul. Right? So I'm only going to see the highlights of Istanbul for a couple of days, and so I want to see the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
If I'm going to be there for a month, you get some other thicker books, one might say. Plus, the other thing that I do is all the libraries will have DVDs of all these places. So I will borrow a DVD on Istanbul and go through it. So it gives me some kind of preparation to see certain things. Like in Istanbul, you've got the Grand Mosque and a few other things. So I get some kind of visual preparation. And the Vancouver Library, because it's the second largest in Canada, has a huge amount. Probably Langley does too, because that's part of Fraser Valley Regional Library. They've got all kinds of branches, and they've got all kinds of books. I even borrow from them, and so that's a good starting point. You know, for example, many years ago I was in the Cook Islands. I borrowed a DVD, and Rarotonga, the main island, is just a circular island, and they got one roadway around about 100 yards away from the beach, and they have two buses. One bus goes clockwise around the island, and the other bus goes counterclockwise around the island. It takes 45 minutes, I think, each way. Costs $1. Right? So that I took both trips because you got a different perspective, and I got that from a DVD on the Cook Islands.
Great information. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's a very good point. Public transit is actually a very good way to get a cheap or free tour. So we often do that. We take buses around. Sometimes we take unlimited travel passes as well, and that works out very well. Do we have any other questions here?
What's your top 10 favorite countries? In the
Oh,
101?
that's always a difficult one. I would say just because it's a recent trip, I would put Israel, Egypt, and Jordan definitely in the top 10. In Africa, I would say South Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, for all the major game parks. What do we have? 4 left. Belize, I really enjoyed the manatees and especially the wild shark diving. So that's actually one of the videos that this is here. We had the wild sharks just...
Do you have your scuba certification?
Yes, I do. I just recently got that last year. This was just snorkeling. Actually, the scuba certificate, is that something
They're
you have
knocking
to
the building, that's why.
Oh, okay.
Last time I disarmed it, they were wondering why it wouldn't lock. So just leave it alone.
Leave it? Okay, okay. What were we saying? Yes, in Belize, you can actually see everything you need to see in terms of wild animals with just snorkeling. The exception is the blue holes. They actually have what's called technical diving. So I have my base certification, which is PADI open water. For a lot of the jaw-dropping destinations like the Blue Hole in Belize, like the continental plates in Iceland, you actually have to have an advanced scuba dive and a number of technical dives under your belt. So even if you have your PADI certification, which is the lowest level, you have to be aware that all of the major scuba diving destinations outside of the tropics are ones where you actually have to invest in learning it properly. That's one thing I would suggest to people. I've met so many people when we were learning to scuba dive who they just went off to some developing country and they took them to some of the most dangerous depths we've ever heard of on a first dive. And if you know anything about scuba diving, if you have no training and you're down 100 feet, which is beyond what some people do as advanced divers, you could be in serious trouble. So that's something to consider.
How much was it to get?
Sorry, what were you saying?
To get
the certification here.
Yeah.
If you stack all of the discounts, you can get your PADI open water full and done for probably under $400.
Here?
Yeah, here.
Better to do it here.
Yeah, I would say do it here because I tried to fit it in while I was traveling in other countries, and it was just something that I found took too much focus. Now, I think it really depends on your relationship with water. Before I learned to scuba dive, I would have described myself as someone who's a strong swimmer. Even then, when I attempted to shark dive in a tank in Australia as my first scuba experience, I freaked the fuck out. My brother was with me and he does not know how to swim. I'm a strong swimmer. I went almost up to lifeguard level, so I'm confident. As soon as I put on that mask and went underwater, something happened. I snapped, he snapped, and we had to do a modified version where we were still able to interact with the sharks, but we didn't do the full situation. After that, I had tried several times to see if I could fit it in, but I just decided to bite the bullet and do it here, where you can focus on it and take the time to really learn.
And know that you're getting somebody that's as qualified as you should be.
Yeah. The thing, too, about doing it here is that you're learning to scuba dive in cold water, so you're essentially prepared for almost any situation. This is one of the difficult places to learn to dive, one of the most difficult outside of Antarctica, Arctic, and Iceland. So I would give thumbs up for learning it here.
And your last 4 favorite countries?
Oh, right, my last 4 favorite countries. Belize, because I had the situation with the wild manatees, wild sharks, wild rays, and wild turtles. 3 more. I would say I'll hold on to that one. I'll come up with the 3 at the very, very end.
If you could recommend 3 places for everyone here, especially those who are newish to traveling, where should they go that they might not think of going? I think is quite safe, but is also really underrated.
I think Belize is the one that I would go for ease. Yeah, for ease. I would still say some places in Africa. Tanzania. Kenya too. Masai Mara, Kenya. The thing with that is I'm one of those people where once you're in Africa, I want to be there for 4 months. That's my mentality. So when people ask me to hack up that Africa trip I did into little pieces, I feel so attached to it. I always want to recommend it as the 4-month bush camping. I know realistically very few people want to or can do that. But if I were to say go for the whole 4 months, of the countries in the 13, Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa.
Talking about Africa, currently on the Knowledge Network, they have a 5-part program on the trains of Africa. And one that I watched went from Marrakesh all the way to Tunisia. I saw another one on that went through Zambia and Zimbabwe together. Another one that I just watched the other day was on Kenya and Tanzania, and these are hour-long documentaries where the Welshman actually goes on these trains through all these countries. So you get to see a whole bunch of other countries other than just the train. You get to see the country and the savannah and all that kind of stuff. It's currently on. All you have to do is find out, it's on the Knowledge Network, as I said, and find out the day and the time that it's being broadcast. And if you've got a PVR so you can watch it at your leisure.
Oh, that's a good one.
Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, I have to run. Bye-bye, everyone.
So I've been to about half of your top 10 countries.
That's good.
Yeah, I'm really, yeah.
That's good.
Five to go.
You're what? Yeah, I go 5
5
out of 10 with hers, yeah.
Yeah, that's
With
good.
your top 10, so yeah. No, I know.
Yeah, I haven't got
I'm
to
at
10
half,
yet.
I think I've got 5 already.
That's the thing. I would actually say probably nothing in Europe would make my top 10. I'm going to go by continents now. Nothing in Europe would make my top 10. South America, let me think. I like Antarctica personally. It's not a continent. I mean, it is a continent and not a country.
Yeah.
My brother loves glaciers, so we actually end up going to places like Greenland, Iceland, Antarctica. He likes that kind of thing, so I would say that kind of trip. But that being said, you can actually get that in Canada too. And I'm missing one more. I'll get there. Any more questions?
What about places like Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Bali, Indonesia?
Maybe because I'm of Asian descent. I think Asia's less exciting to me. Yeah, I was born in Canada, but my first travel experiences were immediately going back to Hong Kong, showing me off to the grandparents. I sort of know the vibe of Asia, and I feel, not to call them a monolith, but I feel like I've been around that sort of vibe before, so Asia would not make my top 10. Southeast Asia wouldn't make my top 10, but maybe if you consider the Middle East top 10, there were a couple countries I said, Israel, Egypt, Jordan. Those would be more that I concentrate on. That being said, though, there's a ton of problems traveling through the Middle East, too, that come with it. So you gotta take your decisions and think about them that way.
So earlier, when Stephanie was showing the Tour Radar website, you can actually just contact those companies directly, and you can negotiate with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Madagascar, I think, back in 2018, and on the website it's $900 Canadian for a 7-day tour of Madagascar. So I contacted the company directly, and I said, can you do it for 600 Canadian? And they said, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I didn't even have to negotiate hard. There's 4 of us.
So it was 700 US?
It was 900 Canadian.
900, okay.
Yeah, but
You
I
said 600.
well, it was 400 US, roughly 400, which is about 600 Canadian at the time. So, yeah, and he said okay. Like he didn't even like fight me on it. He just said okay.
Yeah.
And I said, can I pay you when we arrive? He's like, well, it's not my preferred, but okay. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay.
Yeah.
Done. And then we arrived. We paid him when we arrived. Amazing service. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he could have sold that spot just 2 minutes before you arrived.
What's that?
He could have sold that spot somebody else willing to pay
He's
the full
holding it for
price.
you, though.
No, he held it for us.
He did.
Yeah.
I didn't know he was holding it. he might have sold it.
Because he didn't sell it, that's why I held
Well,
it.
he could.
I know.
Yeah.
But that's
I've been to
paranoid.
hotels where they sold the spot.
No, but that's paranoid thinking. You know.
I know, but
No, but then he could just hire more staff to
Yes.
service
to have
me
more.
and someone else.
Okay.
Why would they say no to money? They can just get their,
Yeah.
get someone on our vehicle to service us, and another driver and vehicle to service someone else.
Okay.
Generally speaking, they have more than enough capacity on these tours.
Yeah.
There's been maybe one cruise I've been on that's sold out, and most of them have enough capacity. But that being said, people like Hendrik and me, we're sort of comfortable finagling another solution. Like for me, if a cruise goes out of my budget, I just drop it. Or something goes out of my budget, I just don't do it and do it next time. And I substitute what's cheap. Now, obviously, the more you travel, you're going to run out of countries to do that if you're country collecting. But for me, I've largely followed the deals. And I've done that too. Yes, I have commissions at Tour Radar, but sometimes even I undercut myself and just go direct because the commissions don't make up for what I would earn if I would just go direct. So that's the fact-finding mentality and the fixing mentality. I think going back to what I said before, if you're thinking that you're going to divorce yourself from reality and go on a trip and not think, then the only way that you can maybe have that is if you go to all-inclusive resorts. Any other type of traveling, I think it's dangerous to divorce yourself from reality and think that everything will go perfect. I'd rather you have a flexible approach where you expect things might go wrong and then just roll with them as it is.
So I have a question. Like you said you went to Antarctica. Did you book that from here, or did you start do you budgeting when you got down there and finding the company you were going to go to Antarctica with? Because obviously you can't just fly there on your own. You have to go with a company.
With Antarctica, I actually went with a major cruise line.
So you
So
booked it from here?
yes, I booked it from here. So I would say when I'm traveling with my family, 95% of the details are already pre-booked. So that's why I say fact find before you travel. I would prefer to fact find before you travel. But when you're there, opportunities will come up that are not necessarily on a tour or on a cruise. So when I was saying I was the only person who swam with the manatees, or I was the only person who slid down a volcano, that was because I knew that these were possible activities and they weren't offering them the way I wanted through the tour, or not offering them at all. And then I just had to go on the ground and do it myself. Yeah. Now, the reason why I waited till going on the ground was because when you're on a tour, sometimes the logistics are difficult to coordinate things in advance. So, for example, on a cruise, I never book shore excursions in advance. I either wait to actually see who my options are when I arrive shoreside, or I would go with the ship. I've never actually booked someone to meet me there and paid them already. The only exception is there have been times where I've booked and I have not paid yet. So on the last trip was the first time I've ever done it, because not so many people are keen with you not paying a single dime. They want a deposit, and I'm just not comfortable doing that myself. Now, maybe in certain situations I would do it, but I haven't come across that yet. I haven't had to do that yet. Have you done that yet, where you paid in advance?
One time I paid in advance, but it wasn't working, so they refunded me, and they said just pay me when
you get there.
So,
okay. Generally speaking, what's your point of view?
I prefer to pay when I arrive.
Okay.
I don't like to pay in advance. So I'm not against it if I know the company is reputable.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to like a weird country I've never been to, and it's, then I like to pay when I arrive. Like my tour to Syria, I'm gonna pay them when I arrive. They asked me for a deposit. I said, no, we're gonna pay you when we arrive.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay. He's not gonna say no because it's money.
Yeah.
Right?
What was the deposit they were requesting?
They weren't asking for a lot, like just $100.
Yeah, even then I don't want it.
But I don't want to.
Yeah.
I said no. I'll pay you when we arrive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing with cruise ships too is that sometimes ports are missed, and if it's missed, I've seen people just have a nightmare trying to cancel and get their money back. I find it's easier to just negotiate with all the people that show up to shoreside, because there are so many people who show up wanting to sell their services. So why spend all the time trying to get your money back when you know exactly when you've arrived that you're actually there already, and then you can immediately tell them what you want. And the only difference is negotiating what you want. There's always going to be people who are there to give you a service, probably within the budget that you set. I've never met anybody or been in a port where they haven't been able to provide me something within my budget that I wanted.
So who did you go with when you went on your Antarctica cruise?
I went with Holland America, and I've actually went on Holland America for most of my cruises. I did them for Antarctica, I did them for the Arctic, including repositioning through Greenland and Iceland, Scandinavia, Nordic. I've gone with them to Morocco, I've gone with them through the Panama Canal. So despite them being skewing older, they make up with adventurous itineraries. They don't have the fancy boat. The last time I did an entire talk on adventurous cruises, for some of you who might remember, I tell people they're not the fancy boat people. They're not the ones that have an amusement park on board, water slides, all that. But also, you pay for that.
Yeah.
You pay for that, and are you actually using it is the question. I would say if you pick a good cruise itinerary, if you're doing it right and you're using your port time to the maximum, you probably don't have the energy to spend, let's say, 12 hours in port, in a beautiful port like Egypt, and then come back and then go on a water slide and go on the amusement park. Even on sea days, you probably want to rest. So I found that it works out well. I'd prefer a better itinerary any day.
And you find Holland America as being more adventurous?
I found it to be so far the one that I've been on the most. I've been on 3 cruise lines. I've been on Holland, I've been on Norwegian, and I've been on Pullman Tour. And I would say at least up till 2018, Holland had the best value for adventurous cruises. They're not the only ones who do adventurous cruises, but if you look at where they go and how much they cost, they're the best value. And I find if you put just the ports head-to-head with someone else, for example, who's going to Antarctica, they have a better itinerary, i.e. more ports, more activities, and cheaper price. So to me, I don't care about all the other stuff. Some people have said, oh, I want to go on a 6-star luxury ship to Antarctica where they know my name. I'm like, fuck. Plenty of people know my name. You guys know my name. I don't need people to call me by my name.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't need people to serve me caviar on a bedspread. I'm not that kind of person.
How's Pullman tour? Because they have really good deals for repositioning cruise I've seen.
Pullman tour is all right. Take it as an opportunity to learn Spanish. They're
Spanish only?
they're not Spanish only. They speak English on board, but they cater more to Spanish speakers.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Just take it as, for me, a cruise ship is literally a moving hostel.
Oh.
To me, okay? But they have about 3-star. Usually the places that I've been to, they give you about a 3-star hotel room accommodation for a less than hostel price.
It's 1 star for Pullman tour then?
No. Pullman tour is still, I would say, 2
star?
I'd say actually 3 stars. I would say Pullman tour is about 2.5 to 3 star. Holland and Norwegian, I would say between 3 to 4 star. Okay. But you're paying a hostel price. That's why I always say if you find the good deals.
It's so cheap though.
It's so cheap. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's so cheap.
Like is it $250 for like a 14-day cruise across the Atlantic?
There we go.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So you have to know that obviously when you're on board cruises, they're going to try to upsell you. There are many ways that they earn their money back. So trust me, when they give you the cheap price, you have to know the traps too. But if you're a person who doesn't drink, you're pretty disciplined, you don't give them money back that way, then you'll be fine. Then you'll win on them. If you go to the casino, drink all the time, do that, then you might be given some of those savings back.
Internet, photo packages.
Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Is this website
I don't
Tour
know.
Radar?
Oh, sorry. Here. Tour Radar. Where do we go here? Tour Radar. So on the meetup page, I linked my Tour Radar referral link that you can feel free to use for 5% off your purchases. Otherwise, at least use it as a search engine. I use it all the time as a search engine. Now, I'm sad that they don't have the long list. Even last time we did this in 2018,
It was here.
there was like pages and pages. So I'm not sure what's going on.
I still remember the joke you cracked too.
Yeah, exactly. So things change in travel all the time, and that's why you have to look out for good opportunities. I'm actually kind of surprised they don't have more, because given how many people are canceling due to coronavirus, there should be a flood of people trying to get rid of tours. So maybe there's something else going on that I'm not aware of.
Well, maybe it's in Africa, they don't want to work. So it's
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That could be it too.
Like,
they really don't.
No tours, that's fine.
Yeah.
Hakuna Matata.
Hakuna Matata. We have any other questions? Or do we even have time?
One thing the cruise lines do to encourage you taking their own cruises, they'll guarantee that the ship won't leave without you. If there's some delay, or they'll
That is true.
they'll catch up.
You do
For
there,
those
you won't
nervous.
leave you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. For me, I personally, when I'm organizing my own trip, I'll always tell the person, the tour operator, 2 hours in advance of when I actually have to be there. So let's say all aboard time, which is when you have to be on the ship by, is 8 p.m. I tell them 6 p.m. Okay? So with that, if we arrive early, I'll just do whatever's around the port for the last hour or two and walk on the ship. I've never been late for a port myself, and I've been to over 100, but that's a time management thing. I think people who do get left, something major happens, or they are really tight, they say 7:55 when they're supposed to be back at 8. Some people do that. This is a project management thing or a management thing. Everybody has a different style. So there are ways to make sure that you don't do that, because if you go
Just phone in a bomb threat.
yeah, see, that's the thing. With shore excursions, they give you that guarantee, but they also charge you easily 10 times what you would pay for yourself. So if, let's say, for us, when we go on a cruise, we're usually doing 3 to 4 week long cruises. That adds up if you're paying times 10 on every port. So if basically you're paying for the price of your whole trip, going through shore excursion, you might only get 2 or 3 ports, whereas you could have paid for your entire trip with that budget. So it really is a risk management thing. Some people are not comfortable negotiating under stress. I'm very good at it. My whole family's good at it because we have an accounting firm. So we're all good at it. Even if sometimes I'm not really on game, my mom's there or my brother's there. So when I say that they don't do anything, I mean they don't do anything as their preference. If they see that I'm struggling, or on my trip where I was 7 months and I had spent 4 months in Africa and met them in Germany, I told my brother, I'm mentally gone. You're going to have to step up. And he was able to step up. So it's a good thing to have people that you travel with have some skills too, because I think it's very difficult to be taking people who absolutely can't contribute at all. I don't know, how do you feel? Do you feel Karen is like a big sack, or you think she's good enough?
Well, she's not here, so I'm just kidding. No. So Karen plans the small stuff for us. She does the first aid kit. She organizes my bag, because last time I took a year off to travel. My bag was in disarray, so she organized it for me. So she does the small stuff. I do the big stuff. Because one time she wanted to plan the trip for us, so I was like, okay, go ahead. And she got a headache after 5 minutes, so she's like, okay, you do it. So it depends. Like usually when you're dating someone, one person is good at planning, the other person just tags along, right? So that's just like it could be male, it could be female. You know, like I went to Point C once, and we had this one woman who did all the planning for the trip for him and his boyfriend. The first question the boyfriend asked, like, oh, what outfit should I bring to this trip? You know, and he's a dude, right? So
yeah,
you know, so that's just how it is.
When I was in India, I was the one in charge of all the planning, and then the girl that I was with was in charge of getting us all the food, because I can't stand trying to figure out what food we're going to eat.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
And so it was a good mix for the two of us for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Personally, I actually do not travel with anyone other than my mother and my brother, because I find it too much responsibility. Even if it can technically reduce your costs in many ways, I don't like it because it's like work to me. But I know some other people are cool with it. Gloria's good at doing it. Troy does it.
Yeah, Gloria's amazing.
Gloria's amazing at it. Yeah.
Well, I traveled with a friend for the first time recently to Russia.
Oh.
And I wouldn't say I had a great time because he was so paranoid about everything. It just ruined the experience, you know? Like, for example, we're going to ask for directions. And so, in that case, you just go up to the stranger and ask them for direction. He's like, no, we don't do that. I'm like, what do you mean we don't do that? Like, he's like, no, we can figure it out. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, anyway, I ignored him. I obviously asked the question.
Yeah.
And if they don't speak English, I figure it away because I have backpacked before.
Yeah.
So he's a little bit fearful. And I said, just chill out. You know, everything's going to be okay. Just.
Would you go with him again?
No.
Okay. Were these habits that you could foresee, or was it something where this?
No, I never thought this was going to happen.
Ah, see. Yeah.
Yeah, and he also thought he knew what he was doing too, which I was like, okay.
Has he traveled before?
A little bit.
See?
He's a travel hacker, so he's really good at earning points and miles.
Okay, that surprises me.
But he does luxury travels. He only does first class, business class. He stays at nice accommodations, you know. So he's used to that kind of standards.
Yeah.
For me, I'm closer to you. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to sleep outdoors like you do.
That's something I would also say, if you can plan as far ahead as possible. Increase your budget rather than decreasing your budget. Have a slush fund for things that might come up. I mean, obviously, $1,000 gorilla trek is way out there. That's not always going to happen. I would say, it would have been smarter for me to budget going than not going. But I turned it into an adventure for me. So my mindset is always, oh, this is a fun adventure that I could go on. That's not everybody's style. For example, when my mom comes with me, she's like, 4 walls and a ceiling. I don't care what it looks like, but please, 4 walls and a ceiling. So she's quite adventurous for someone her age, but not as adventurous as me. Yeah. And adventure is different depending on who you talk to.
When I go with my girlfriend and my sister, the rule is nice washroom. That's the number one thing, nice washroom.
Yeah.
So my Karen's rule is nice washroom. My younger sister's rule is no spiders. So
that's difficult.
I know that's hard, but we try. And if there is a spider, she takes Xanax and drugs herself.
Well, she's that afraid of spiders.
Yeah. She's really good at planning though.
Okay.
So when I travel with her, I can rely on her with the planning stuff.
Okay.
But when it comes to spiders, she just shuts down and it's over. Like you, kind of like you, yeah, like you. I'm scared of spiders.
Really?
Not that much.
Yeah, no.
I'm sitting at my home. I'm from Calgary, and a big spider that looks like a tarantula goes through on my
His
carpet.
girlfriend killed a spider for him.
Oh, really? Wow.
She actually picked it up. She got stung by it.
She got stung by it? Whoa. Okay.
His girlfriend kills the spiders for him.
Okay.
The next day, she was at the beach at the Solent Lake.
Wow.
All right, everyone. Wrap it up now.
Okay, yes.
So, thank you everyone for coming to this meetup. The next one is probably going to be in 3 weeks, all right? Let me just get the date here. I don't have a speaker yet, so if anyone knows anyone that wants to speak about their travel experience, let me know. It's going to be on the 22nd of February, same time as today. I'm still looking for speakers. I can't find any male speakers. 80% of our speakers are women.
Wow.
All right, we get 20%.
What
Male.
about the guy who left early?
No, he already talks like a lot.
Yeah, no, trust me, I know.
He gives unsolicited advice too much. That's
Yeah.
But he's very helpful.
yes.
He's all about cruises, though.
Is he? Okay.
Yeah.
If you want to know about cruises, talk to him, but it's very...
But I already know his advice. It's some kind of fear mongering advice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So.
What's the date?
Troy can
Yeah.
Yeah, Troy can be a
yeah,
speaker.
you can be speaker.
Yeah, he's always fear mongering. This is bad. This is gonna happen to you. This is gonna happen to you. This is gonna happen to you. I'm like, oh, jeez.
I just want to share something real quickly. As you know, with this coronavirus, if anyone wants to get a mask in Vancouver, it's very hard. They still sell them at the Home Depot in Bellingham and Mount Vernon if you wanted to make the drive down there. I was buying gas last night and they had, boxes here and boxes there. So you can pick it up there. So if you're going to Syria and you need it for a plane or something like that, you can pick up a box of 30 for $20.
It does nothing, no.
Yeah.
It only protects,
it's useless.
you from transmitting.
You need a full
Yeah.
mask for it to really protect you.
Have you seen the water
Have you
bottles
seen
that
the
people
container
carry?
heads? That's resourcefulness right there. But see, the thing is that I'm afraid some kid's gonna die suffocated from that container, and that's the thing where people rush to snap judgments and then they do things that could be counterproductive. But then, also being the case, with a pandemic, it's hard to say.
Just don't go to China. You'll be fine. Yeah.
So far.
I don't plan to return anytime soon.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes, you might be stuck.
Don't go to China.
I
You'll be
will. I've got no convenience. Are you serious? This is
Yeah, this is the woman in the air.
Okay, thank you very much,
Yeah, no
Stephanie.
worries.
It's always nice to listen to you talk.
Go to, when in Turkey, go to Nemrutag. Way out of the way, but fantastic. Some king lopped the top off a mountain and put the statues and some buried there. Did the same for his sister, but 500 meters
The social points.
lower.
I'll have plenty of time. I can chill out in I have not planned anything yet.
Well, you can just go far east, all the way to the Armenian border. The further you go in the Kurdish areas of southeastern Turkey, the more interesting it is.
I might actually do that because the tour that I was going to go through was trying to route through Central Asia via Iran, but I can just go.
You can go around. All the stand countries are cool too. I've been in all of them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was thinking of going to the Islamic countries, but then because that tour that I was looking at runs through Iran, I had to think of a different route. But I could also just go straight across.
You can go straight across. No, it's not all that hard.
Oh, man. Did you do it by yourself?
I work for the US. Belize also I like. One of my favorites.
Yes, yes.
All right. I'm just fascinated by your kinks, though, but a whole other story.
You have to watch the 50 Shades of Grey.
I guess so, yeah.
Yes, and that's something that I think not a good idea to mix on the road. It's actually very similar to why you wouldn't try to scuba dive on the road.
Yeah, I think
There are
so.
just some things.
There's different standards in different places.
Yeah.
I wanted to say thank you for your
Yeah,
speech today.
no
It was
worries,
very
no worries.
interesting. I really enjoyed it.
Are you gonna get your scuba?
I know, probably not. I don't like the cold water.
Always excellent. Always enjoy speaking. I had a ton of things to do, but I said, now I'm going to listen to you if I can make it. Just, I didn't want to ask this question in front of everyone.
Yeah.
The hippo incident, she died. She got killed by the hippo.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah, that's what I understood. You put it very delicately, but I didn't want to.
Yes, the hippo
Oh,
lady
that's
died.
quite an unpleasant way of dying, but
She, in some ways, went full tilt and did it.
my favorite animals, giraffe and hippos. I wanted one of those hippo, they have a thing in the middle that you can put in. I went to buy one at Granville Island and they closed down. But anyways, we swam amongst hippos, not very far from us in Nairobi. I'm from Kenya, right? Lake Naivasha. We didn't know they were dangerous. Nobody told us until we went back. These guys can kill. They do kill.
Yeah, they actually
They look so cute.
have the #1 mortality rate for humans is from hippos.
I did not even know that. So
I have to search it up again, but someone told me that.
I think partly because they look so cute.
They also
I don't
look
blame her.
clumsy and slow, but they're very deceptively fast.
Yeah.
So that's the thing where it's, like you said, there's a fine line between fear mongering and reality, and it's very hard to say what the line is.
Yeah.
Some people think this is fear mongering, some people think this is fear mongering.
But if a person generally is fear mongering all the time, then you lose trust in.
That's why I said the U.S. I'm largely just ignoring things they say because they're just doing a ton of things that are against best practices. Even with this whole shutdown of China coming in, it's against the best practice. Now maybe people will follow suit, but I have found that politically speaking, recently there have been a number of choices that you make for political reasons and not for, say, health reasons. Yes. So, for example, the U.S. started repatriating people, so then other countries don't want to look like they're not doing anything. But I would much rather than have a sound reason than just doing it for political reasons. But again, I'm not Justin Trudeau. I don't need people kissing my ass, right? So that's something that he has to make a choice. I just wish that people would return to the evidence-based approach, and that's become more and more difficult as time has gone on.
Social media has really made it.
Oh, it's just made it exponential.
Don't either because you never know.
Yes, that's the thing. That's the thing.
But they highlight the fear.
Information that I can think of, I will then supplement what the government says with my own research because the government doesn't cover everything. And with that, unfortunately, there is sort of a traveler's intuition that you develop. I've done a lot of fucking crazy stuff, but that doesn't mean that I did the right things looking back, and that's why I have open dialogues with people.
I don't think people can do what she does though, because she's kind of like she's tougher, right?